What is, what was, and what will be start here with the words, in the beginning there was...
And welcome to the first actual episode of Bearded Game Masters. Today you're going to be joined by myself, Ron, and I'm joined by one of my co-hosts, Mike, here. Today our topic is going to be Nintendo versus Sega.
The good old days.
Oh, yeah, all the schoolyard arguments, the corny commercials, anything and everything.
The territorial nerd pissing.
Exactly. Now that's a bit of a topic we could go on about this for days, if you will. Right. But we're going to see if we can touch over some of the stuff that we really, think is fun here.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to say if we want to do the fight again, you have to be one or the other. You can't be both. I mean, no one is allowed to have both a Super Nintendo and a Genesis. You can't do it. Not allowed. It's impossible. Never happened.
No, growing up, that wasn't a thing.
No. So I know I was Nintendo. Were you Nintendo or Sega?
I was Nintendo.
Okay.
And that's solely based on the fact that the rest of my family was Nintendo as well. So
Right. But we all had that friend that had Sega.
Oh yeah.
Always had that one friend who had Sega. Yeah.
Always. And then there was always the argument about on who had the better system and the better games and whatnot. So, I mean, I don't know about you, Mike, but I have had an opportunity to play around with a Sega back in the day, and actually, a couple of years ago. So I know for the most part, some of the games that had come out on the Sega system. Mm-hmm. So I'll take that neck of the woods here on this part of the argument. But how about yourself? Well, what was your fuel on this one?
Well, I think you and I could both agree when it came to the original Nintendo, the Master System was gone. It was not there. No one had one. I didn't know anybody had one. All right. No. So really, this fight was really between the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. And my first, my first experience with having a Genesis was I didn't have a Super Nintendo yet. And my father had rented a Genesis from the local video store, and it was the Model 1. It was a big, bulky thing.
Oh, my God. I forgot you could even do that back in the day, actually.
You could rent the console, right?
You could rent the console. That is right.
And I had rented that, and, of course, it came with Sonic. And it was – I had a little love-hate thing with it because, obviously, it looked a lot prettier than the Nintendo. I mean, and this is when I was just getting around to playing the Mario 3, which I thought was, I was blown away when I got to level 2 and I was realizing, holy crap, there's more to this cartridge than these 10 levels. Having gone from Mario 1 to Mario 3, I was like, wow. But with the Genesis, it absolutely looked pretty. But the controller was so big for my hands. And now I'm like
controller
8, 9 years old.
Yeah,
that was a little awkward, and it didn't feel right. The other thing was that here is the Sonic's supposed to be moving fast. I don't know about you, but every time I turn around, I hit a wall or hit spikes, and so it's like, and of course this is pre-internet, so I couldn't go on YouTube and look for Taz speed runs and be at awe. But I'm like, what? Yeah, it kind of put me off a bit, and but it was like a love-hate thing, because like I said, it did look really nice. It looked really pretty, but that was really my only experience. I mean, later on, of course, I had my friend who had a Genesis. I went to his house mainly because this was 94. This was like 94, 95, and that time in the kids' world, it was all about Jurassic Park, and I wanted to try the Genesis version because I wanted to play the Velociraptor. And
I remember that. Yes,
I thought that was pretty neat because he had that. I was by that time I was now stuck in the Nintendo camp, especially at that time. I think I had the Mega Man X game, and that was my absolute bragging right. Why the Super Nintendo was way better. So yeah, that's been my experience with the Genesis.
All right, fair enough. Well, all right. So my experience back then with the Genesis. Where do I start? So, all right, I'll agree with you. This, like, the system in itself was significantly more than the Super Nintendo back then.
Oh yeah,
They're what I like to call it the croissant controller. It is awkward. Like, even by today's standards, when I hold a Sega Genesis controller, like I'm not used to it. It feels weird compared to when I grab a Super Nintendo controller.
Even today with adult hands, it feels weird.
Yeah. Just I don't know. Maybe it's the button placement that's just weird, where it's got what is it, the 2 rows of 3,
A,
and
B, and C.
it's just different.
Oh, that's like the Super. I'm talking about the original, which is just the start button and ABC. That was it.
Oh, you're doing that route. Okay.
And the rounded D-pad that you see on the 360 controller.
Yes, I know which one. I got you there.
Yeah, that's the one I played on, and that one I just couldn't get into. And when my father later on rented the Super Nintendo when it came out, and that was a long waiting period because every kid in town wanted that, rented that thing, and the dumb video store only ordered 2.
Yeah.
Right. So that was an expensive weekend for, I think by the time I rented it, the Super Nintendo enough, my father got around to just buying it because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
But it blew my mind because I've seen pictures of the Super Nintendo controller and the 4 buttons. Holy crap, that's amazing! And then when I actually picked it up, there's buttons on the top.
Mind blown.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
And of course, at that point, the Genesis was out. It was out of my mind. I mean, forget it. It was gone.
So, I know you were talking about games. Yeah, games that you were talking about Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. And I'd actually remember that one because I played it. And how do I word this? Like, I enjoyed the Sega one just a little bit more, solely because I could play a Raptor. Like, I'm a young child and I can play a Raptor and I can mess people up. I love everything about this. But I mean, besides that, there was actually, I have to say, there were some pretty good games that came out on that didn't come out on the Super Nintendo, which is kind of a shame because these are the games that I didn't get to experience until I was a lot older. Like, just to start it off, Splatterhouse. Like, that was a game, unfortunately, like at that time, Nintendo still liked to have that family-friendly look. And Sega tried the whole, let's be edgy and everything. Splatterhouse was one of the games that came out, and for when it actually, for the time frame that they released it, it was pretty. I would actually have to say it was pretty gory for the time frame, but by today's standard, it's a joke. But
I remember seeing commercials for Echo the Dolphin, and I thought that would look really pretty.
Echo was a lot of fun. Yep.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a lot of fun. But really, I was never really exposed that heavily to the Genesis games. Later on, through Steam, when they have that emulation library that Sega released.
Yep.
I've been able to play a few more of the Sonic games. I got to tinker around a little bit with Altered Beast?
Altered Beast, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I would say there's quite a few cross-platforming between the Super Nintendo and the Genesis.
Oh, there was a lot of games that you would see,
right?
On both of them and whatnot. What was some of them here?
Well, Doom, for example.
Doom, okay.
Now the thing is, though, with Doom on Sega, you had to get the 32X. I believe you had to get the 32X to be able to play Doom on the.
I'd be lying if I remembered that one.
Yeah, whereas the Nintendo, and that's something we could talk about for sure, is that the add-ons for Sega. I mean, you could kind of make an argument for the Sega CD, but the 32X, there was no reason for that thing. and and Nintendo's idea of just put the extra chips on the cartridge themselves. So, if you want to play Doom,
I believe they did that for Star Fox, right? Like they had the extra chip in it.
There are quite a few different chips. There are the FX chips, which is a more famous one, but there are the other ones like the DSP-1, I think it's called. Get basically extra processors, extra memory. Mega Man X3 had one chip, and it was only that game that would, just for a couple cutscenes, to have some 3D geometry holograms, just wireframes. And that one game had that one chip, and no other game had that one chip. And I know that because that game was one of the harder games for Super Nintendo emulators to run properly, because it was only this one game that had this one chip. That's what Nintendo was doing. So a lot of, if you look at those game cartridges, Super Nintendo game cartridges, you'll see on the sides, when you go underneath where the pins are, they'll have two extra sets of small pins on either side. And usually that tells you there's extra hardware in that cartridge, and it needs to communicate more with the base system. So I know, like the Sega marketing wank like to point out that, like, oh yeah, the Super Nintendo is slower. True, but it's easier to upgrade with additional chips on the actual cartridges. So whereas, okay, you want to play Doom on the Sega, you got to first buy the 32X, then you can buy Doom. Whereas Super Nintendo's like, okay, just buy Doom. We put the cartridge. It might be a little bit pricier, but it's already in there.
Yeah. And there was a time where that Sega was doing the whole. Well, Sega was doing the whole, like, what was their slogan? Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Right.
And I still, like, even now, still think that's funny. And right. Part of me wishes I still see those kinds of ads, but you never will.
No. Well, Nintendo countered with the Play It Loud thing. And if you remember those Nintendo Power magazines, like the advertisement of the jar full of toenails and stuff like that, they were really good on the level of disgusting with the whole Play It Loud thing. But that was there.
I don't recall that one, actually.
Oh yeah, I'll have to look around for that. But yeah, they Nintendo. I mean, the games themselves stayed family friendly until the N64. Well, that's when they started getting when they started bringing in South Park games and stuff like that. And 91, 92. Yeah, okay. To be fair, Beavis and Butthead was on Super Nintendo, but it was really toned down compared to the TV show.
Yeah, but you're talking about, like, so. The couple of things I want to hit on here. Well, one, you were talking about the add-ons for Sega, which, yeah, they went a little crazy with, like, the what is it, Sega CD, which was like an attachment that the base Sega Genesis sat on, I think. Right. And then there was the 32X, which got plugged into the top of the Sega Genesis, and, like, yeah, they
have the adapter to play the Master System games, which is
something like that, yeah. Like, their add-ons were a little crazy. Though granted, most of the games that came out on Sega CD are pretty much garbage. There's really only a few that I can think of that I like.
There's a movie. It's trash. It's went right to DVD, where they basically use all the unused FMV videos from defunct Sega CD games that never made the market. They just used the videos and made it into a stupid movie. It was an absolute terrible movie. Let's put it, the Wizard was of higher quality.
Oh wow!
Than this thing, and I don't remember the name of it all, but it's absolute trash. But that was a. I mean, I could see that if you wanted to have the full experience of Space Ace, or what's the other Don Bluth video game, arcade game? Dragon Quest. Dragon's Lair, right?
Something like that, yeah.
That one I could see, because that's perfect to have that kind of home arcade experience of Space Ace. But Night Trap, forget it.
Oh, what? What? Listen, hold on. Night Trap? You're gonna talk smack on Night Trap? Okay, all right. First,
Night Trap is what you see on USA Today at 2:00 in the morning. Okay,
probably. But now, first off, Night Trap, in my opinion, is a cult classic.
I'm not saying it's
also.
Not, but it's a terrible game.
Anyone who like the one of three people who actually listen to this, if I'm wrong on this, by all means, please tell me. But I think that Night Trap is the only Sega CD game to actually get re-released on current gen systems, and have an actual
re-released as a movie.
Well, I mean, basically, yeah, it is a movie,
right?
But you just kind of hit buttons and hope that things work. But all right, for me, as someone who's a huge horror buff, especially 80s movie horror buff, playing that, well, let me rephrase it, because I never had the ability to play that, which is a damn shame. But watching people play that, that personified is everything I loved growing up about horror movies, and still to this day. And also, I actually have to give it some credit, the fact that there's people actually wanted this to be put out on current gen systems. I tried to find it, and unfortunately I was too late to the party, and I couldn't pre-order it or not basically sell my first child to get my hands on this.
It's not even for download.
I never looked, but I don't think so. I'd have to check Steam or something like that. But there's this company, I don't know the name of them, and it's a damn shame, because they deserve all the credit they can get. But basically, there's a company that I don't want to say they basically in this case, where they take old games and they put them on hey, here, you can play this on your PS4 or Xbox One. Now, they don't when they sell them, they don't sell them through GameStop or anything like that. You have to order them off of their website.
Yeah.
And then they hook you up with it. That's where I feel like I said, that's how I was too late to the party. I didn't know about it until too late, and then I couldn't get it. But the add-ons for Sega, yeah, they were a little crazy. I mean, Super Nintendo had a few, but mostly their add-ons were back in the Super Nintendo days were just the scope, or
which I had,
or. Well, no, hold on. Yeah, we're talking about the Super Nintendo, not the Nintendo, because the Nintendo.
No, the Super Nintendo ridiculous. Had the bazooka.
They had the bazooka, and it had that. Didn't they have it almost kind of reminds me of one of those aerobic pads? It was a controller. Oh man! All right, basically, from what I remember, it was it. Imagine if you took a piece of a plate and put a ball underneath it, and you'd stand on it, and if you would tilt forward, your character would move forward and left and right and whatnot. I remember that being a thing.
I think Genesis had something like that, with a holographic thing where you
they had an octagon that you would stand on the floor, which
I don't remember Nintendo having anything like that.
I swear Nintendo had. No, I don't think it was first party. But I mean, at that time, everything had this, the Nintendo seal of approval. So Nintendo was okay with it. And then the Nintendo had, I don't know what it was for, but it was almost like a DDR dance pad, except it had these balls on it with numbers, I think.
Well, that was for the Nintendo. That was for the the track games, the racing games.
Is that what that was for?
Yeah, that was for the Nintendo. That wasn't for Super Nintendo. At least I don't think. I had a friend who had that thing. I got to try it once. It was neat.
Interesting. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I swear. I'm going to have to look this one up, actually, at some point.
But the Super Nintendo had the mouse?
Did have the mouse. Yep, Mario Paint. And there was something for Mario,
They also had the Super Game Boy.
Yeah, but that was worth it. That was worth everything.
That was really worth it, because you could bring your entire Game Boy library to the television and save all those batteries.
Yeah. And you get a cool little background.
Now, on the flip side,
the Power Pad. That's what it was called, the Power Pad.
Yeah.
But that was for the Nintendo.
Right. Now, for the flip side, Sega, I think it was either Sega or they subcontracted this out. They released the Genesis essentially as a portable system. I'm pretty sure they did. I've seen something like that. And I don't think it was a home hack. So you could take you basically plug in the whole Genesis cartridge into it, and you play a Genesis game mobily. I'm pretty sure Sega either made it or they authorized it. I don't think it was one of those home hacks, which you see for like Nintendo and Super Nintendo, and then even the 64 I've seen as a portable handheld. But those are all home hacks.
All right. I mean, also, nope, lost my train of thought there on that one. No. Forget it.
Well, let's talk about the genres. I think certain genres are more prominent on each system than the other, or at least played better. Yes. RPGs, or especially Japanese RPGs, were dominant on Nintendo because Square and Enix, before they merged, were all over Nintendo.
Man, I might argue that one.
I'm not saying there's a couple of really good ones. But when you talk about the plethora, word of the day, the plethora, it was on Super Nintendo. The Final Fantasy series, for example, Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore.
I don't know. I mean, technically, I might be the only person who thinks this way, but like the Final Fantasy ones, especially like what was it, 3 or 6, whatever one you want to look at.
Well,
I wouldn't really consider that a JRPG.
No, well, they're made in Japan. Okay,
I feel it's more Americanized.
No. There's a difference. JRPG versus Western RPG. A JRPG is the Final Fantasy is the core what it's supposed to be. You have you don't customize. Let's put it there. So we carried, but it's more experience points building and battling. That whole system. Western RPG is heavy dialogue. Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment. That's like where you could actually play, especially Planescape, where you can actually play the whole game with little to no combat. Let's put it this way, if you have to roll dice, it's a Western RPG. If it's geared towards Dungeon and Dragon style, it's Western RPGs. JRPGs are more aligned with Final Fantasy style, even things like maybe even Robotech, which is kind of like the before Pokemon robot game. EVO, The Search for Eden, I would also consider that JRPG. It's not heavily dialogue driven, whereas Western RPGs are. As a broad scope. Now you get different ones like the isometric views of Baldur's Gate versus the action RPGs of Skyrim, which I consider more of an adventure game. Okay. Zelda is more of an adventure game. There's really no choice. You have to get to the next quest. There's no choice there. Your choice is to walk away from the game. So that's more an adventure game. But that's the distinction. I'm sure there's a better definition out there, but that's the way I see it.
You know what? I'm realizing too here because I'm looking at this and all right. So I was going to argue on how maybe Sega kind of had a few of the better ones, just because they had like Phantasy Star.
Yeah, and that's been said to be pretty good.
Oh my god, yeah, Phantasy Star is amazing. And they had, what did they have? Beyond Oasis, Shining Force 2, Shadowrun. Like those are some really good ones. But then I remember what the SNES had, which was like Chrono Trigger, like you said, Secret of Mana, Earthbound. And one of my personal favorites here, and like I'm not gonna lie, like I would love to get my hands on a physical copy of this, Super Mario RPG. The first and only time that Nintendo and Square actually made a game together, and they never let that happen again. No, I mean, they had like the Lufia series. Okay, so there was
ActRaiser.
I can't even argue that one.
Well, ActRaiser is more like as a civilization building game with an action element, but there's a little bit of role playing into it if you want to do it when you're in the city building part. You kind of role play a little bit. But other games like one of my personal favorites, which is a Underdog, and I have the cartridge, and I can't believe that they go for like $200-300 out of the box, is EVO, The Search for Eden. The grindiest of RPG games, but it's a game that you either have to fall in love with or you hate, and I fall in love with it because I always, being able to create my own dinosaur is a 9-year-old boy's dream come true. Period. And
if we both can agree that we feel that the the RPG slash JRPG was more of the role playing games were maybe a little bit better on the SNES.
Right, because it was mostly Square Enix on the Nintendo.
Yeah.
I don't think they really were on Sega.
I'd have to do a lot of research on. No, not really a lot. I just have to do some quick research on that one. But I would have to say, when it came to action games, and like that's a very broad, spectrum. So, oh man, I don't want to call them like shooters because there weren't really any shooters back then. But like, let's go with like
the schmucks.
Well, the schmucks. What are
the shoot 'em up schmucks? R-Type, Gladius.
No,
Genesis had quite a few of those.
Do you remember how Castlevania was back for the
Yes.
SNES?
Yeah,
And like Contra and all that.
yeah.
I think that Sega might have had a little bit of an upper hand on that one when it came to like those style games, because they had, I think, in all honesty, I think one of the I never got to play it, and it's a damn shame. Again, another one I'd love to get my hands on, but like they had, as a fan of the Castlevania series,
Rondo of
like
Blood?
they had. What's that?
Was it Rondo of Blood?
No, I think I think the one for Sega was Bloodlines.
Okay.
Castlevania Bloodlines. And now that was one I never got a chance to try, but
Right.
I mean, not even just that.
Well, yeah, on the Nintendo one, you had the Super Star Wars series, which is arguably one of the most difficult action shooters on the level of Contra, especially Empire Strikes Back. Super Empire Strikes Back, that was nearly impossible.
Yeah, but I mean, those are based off of. All right, yeah, I'll give that one to you, because like the the Star Wars games, and that they were a lot of fun, and I remember playing through it and getting all the way to the Death Star,
because they didn't have them on the Sega.
Escape from the bloatings. No, but I remember playing it on the SNES, where you're at the spot where you're escaping from the Death Star and dying so many times because it was just so damn hard.
Well, that's something we could talk about, because that Death Star scene, that was Mode 7, and that was a huge selling point for Nintendo when the F-Zero came out. I would have to argue that when it came to like racing games, it was Nintendo, because you had to do Mode 7 at the time for a racing game. And Genesis really, as far as I know, unless you get like the 32X or the Sega CD, didn't really have any 3D racing games. Not of the same quality. All right. If they did, I would believe they had a slower frame rate and they just weren't of better quality. I knew I'm going to hear from something, okay, like some Formula One racing game. Okay, fine. But when you look at F-Zero, Mario Kart, Stunt Rate FX, and and the Mode 7 used in other games such as Final Fantasy, Secret of Mana, the Super Star Wars games, the land speeder stuff, stuff and all that, the Death Star Trench, that was all that Mode 7 stuff, and that was great.
I think, didn't they have like Road Rash, which was kind of like that 3D style? I think.
I remember hearing about the game. I don't remember looking at it right now, so can't think of the top of my head.
Yeah. So all right, they had. So far we're basically 2-1 here on on the board, if you will.
Fighting martial arts
fighting games.
Okay.
Now
this could go back and forth.
We can't all right. So when you're talking about like fighting games, we can't include like Street Fighter, and we can't include Mortal Kombat, because those came out on both.
Right. Killer Instinct was on Nintendo, because at the time Rare was a Nintendo allied company. But my thing is that you look on you go to you look at the Mortal Kombat cabinet, the Street Fighter cabinet, the Killer Instinct cabinet. You had the joystick and how many buttons? 4, 5, 6?
Something like that, yeah. Okay.
I dare you to try doing some Street Fighter combos on that croissant controller on the Sega Genesis with just the 3 buttons in the start. All right. I've heard some really horror stories and some hand twisting you have to do to get some combos.
Also, looking at this here, the Gen 2 Genesis system had the 6 buttons on it.
Right, and that's different. They had to bring out the extra buttons. They had to fix that problem. But when it first came out, you could not, do that. Street Fighter was on Nintendo. If you wanted to play Street Fighter, you had a Nintendo. Now the thing though that set everything off, and this is where separate a lot of this is really where the divide happened in the playground back in the day, is the blood option in Mortal Kombat. That really that was the nuclear bomb of the playground. Yep. And Nintendo had to answer with Killer Instinct, which had the blood in it, and you couldn't turn it off. It was there.
Yeah, but wasn't it like just colored green or some?
Well, it depended on the character. Like like Fulgore was probably green or something like that. But if you hit Orchard or Django, it was red.
Yeah, but now to be fair, like especially now, this would be more prevalent then. But I guess you can include it in now too. When you think of Killer Instincts, you don't think of like gore. Like you're gonna ask me like a gory fighting game, it's always going to be Mortal Kombat. Right. There's
there's no spine ripping, and you knock them off the building and have them drop. You didn't. That was I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, you had the blood, quote the blood, but you didn't have the gore, and that could be a level of taste. All right.
But I mean, I'm sorry. Like as a young child who just loved all that stuff.
Right.
I have to give it to Sega on that one. Like they had the balls, they had that stuff.
Right. Then they did that again. That was the nuclear bomb that set everything off. And I don't know if it did. I could think at that point there was no conversions. You either were a Nintendo or you were a Sega to begin with. I think it just created a greater divide among the two camps. And I forget the Neo Geo guy. He's the one guy in town who had all the money. The one guy,
the
one guy who can blow $200 on a cartridge the size of a textbook to play that. And I don't know anybody with a TurboGrafx 16. Never even heard of it until much later when you see some of these retrospective videos on YouTube. I had no idea what that was. Absolutely. That was the thing.
I've never even seen that. I just actually did a quick search on that just because I'm like, what the hell is this?
What, the TurboGrafx?
The TurboGrafx 16. I have never seen this.
The games came on a card. You put the card in, and all the chips or anything. Because that's how it was, and that was popular in the Japan. And I think Nintendo was the one who basically shot that one down. They dominated in the Japanese market. And that's where Sega really had to go to the States to try to make some profit. I mean, gore wise, when it comes to fighting games, Genesis they got it. But until they updated the controller, it was really Nintendo on that. So, it's a preference which way you want to go, because you had Mortal Kombat in the Super Nintendo. You had better control, because you had extra buttons. You had more buttons to do different fighting moves. You didn't have the blood on the Genesis, unless you had that souped up controller. You had limited buttons options, but you had the gore once you put the key combination in, right? So there was a trade off. Which do you want?
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's where it came. If we want to talk about parity, the one thing that the Super Nintendo had that Genesis just didn't have was the Sony sound chip.
Yep. And then there's that infamous Sony Nintendo game system.
Right. So you had the Sony sound chip, and you could hear the difference between the two games. Now you talk to a Sega fan now, they'll tell you that the Sega chipset is a work of marvel and it's a beautiful thing to listen to. I kind of I would rather hear Chrono Trigger's music through the Sony chipset than some waveform on the Genesis. All right, hearing the sound samples was a lot better, and that was, I mean, Doom was a big example of that. Listening to the music on Doom on the Super Nintendo was a lot closer into the original DOS than it was on the Genesis. and there's a video out there that has a sound comparison of the two. But yeah, Nintendo had the sound wise. Nintendo had it. Listen to Mega Man X and its musical score and the sound effects and everything is fantastic.
Yeah, the sound, I gotta agree, the sound was definitely a lot better on the Genesis, or I mean on the SNES than on the Genesis.
Right. Donkey Kong Country.
Oh my God, the memories.
Right. The memories. Same thing with Killer Instinct. They released this was at a time where you never heard of a game's musical store being released on CD, yet these games were getting CD releases. Donkey Kong Country had a CD release. Killer Instinct came with the CD, music CD. All right.
Oh, I see. I don't remember that one.
Killer Cuts.
I also never owned it.
Yeah, I had it. It was the game came on a black cartridge.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I know you own it. I've seen it actually.
Yeah. Comes in a black cartridge. Kind of like how with the Zelda games, the Nintendo came on gold cartridges.
Yes, there were a few that did that.
Carnage on Super Nintendo came on a red cartridge, I think.
You mean Maximum Carnage? Yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. Yep, that one came out on a red cartridge.
Yeah,
I remember that now. Yeah.
I don't know how they pulled that off. That had to be the developer willing to pay the extra penny or two for the red dye, because if I remember, Nintendo built all the games, made all the cartridges. They just you want us to make the game, you pay us to make the game. And I think that's how that went. And there's another thing, the whole seal of quality fiasco, and this is what caused the N64 to essentially be a first party system, and the GameCube as well. Is the quality control that Nintendo pushed on the NES and the Super Nintendo forced a lot of companies to just say adios when Sony came around.
Well, I mean, when it came time for the what was it, the N64?
Right.
I mean, that was right when the PS1 launched.
Right.
And I know Saturn. It was a lot more expensive I don't remember about the Saturn. I don't even remember.
Saturn came around. Saturn was an over-engineered thing that nearly destroyed Sega until they at least got the Dreamcast out. But I don't think Sega ever recovered from the Saturn. Too many different processors. It was too overly engineered, and I don't think it was only
didn't have anything to actually back it up. No titles or anything.
No, and it wasn't until a few years ago where somebody was able to finally reverse engineer the thing so that they can actually look at how this thing worked, because it was so overly complicated. But I could, you go back to the NES era, having come from the Game Crash and the number of crappy games that were on the Atari. I can understand why Nintendo has said, okay, you play by our rules because we want to have quality games. They can be shitty games, but they got to be a certain level of quality. We can't just put in Custer's Revenge on the store shelves. Okay. And it worked. A lot of those other companies, like was it Ultra? They were really Konami, and there was other companies like that.
Yeah,
because they had they can only release so many games per year, so they can, Nintendo's way of forcing some sort of quality control. Don't rush it out. Take your time. You're only allowed 3 or 4 games a year. And the same thing happened with the Super Nintendo, and Nintendo's problem, had they stuck their deal with the Sony and had the Nintendo PlayStation, I think what we have today would be totally different. But instead, they went with Philips, the last possible second, and Sony just went Schwarzenegger on them. All right. Went Bruce Willis, and Nintendo has, I think, only since the Wii sort of recovered from all that. And that was a long time.
Yeah, but see, the thing is with that particular one, and I know we're getting off topic here with the Sega and Nintendo thing, but I at least got to put this out there. Like when the Wii came out, they that did a lot better, I think, than what they expected. And then they, went Wii U, and yeah, that was the thing. And then now they have the Switch, and I have a Nintendo Switch, and I love that thing. I want everything.
And I want to get one too
because it's just so much fun. So I think they've recovered. I think they're doing well.
Right. Yeah.
Or well enough. Let's say. I actually want to say the what was it in sales wise, like the PS4. I think the PS4 was topping in sales, and then not far behind was the Switch or something like that.
Yeah, but in any case, we're getting a little off topic a bit here because we want to focus on that Nintendo versus Sega. But it's hard not to talk about these other things because Nintendo has made some bad decisions themselves. Virtual Boy. So
I never got to try that, and I really wish I did.
I did once. It was demoed at a Sears when they actually sold games back in the day, and I played. It had the Mario Land game, or the Wario Land game on that, and it was fun. But at that time, I was already reading about the problems with the Virtual Boy in terms of people's with vision problems. And I was thinking, this is I'll wait off on this. I think this is a little too soon. And it's a shame because there's actually some really good games on there. There's that robot boxing game on there that everyone says it is the game to have on that. But this Nintendo jumping the gun a little too much too soon because you go in the future here. You got the 3DS, which is I would think would be a proper successor to that.
I guess in retrospect, you could say that, yeah. I mean, Nintendo, I'll give them credit on this. They've always been one to try to innovate and bump things up. They might not be the first one to come out with it, but damn it, they'll push it.
Right. Well, like we mentioned before, the thumbstick on the N64. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you look. So Nintendo. They both had. Sega and Nintendo had the same idea, sort of, when it came to the controller. You need some more meat, other than the NES square box controller, and the Master System pretty much had the same thing. It was a square box with two buttons and a D-pad around the D-pad, but it had a D-pad on there. So they had the idea of putting grips, but Nintendo's idea of doing the dog bone was really because that way you had something to hold on to while you hit the L and R buttons. Genesis had no L and R buttons, at least when they first came. I don't know the other controller with the 6 buttons. Does it have an L and R on the top?
Not to my knowledge.
No, the shoulder buttons. So Nintendo had the idea to put the shoulder buttons up there, which, like I said, blew my mind. When I first saw that, I was like, holy crud. And then having to use them on Mario Kart was fantastic. To be able to make those tight turns, because you couldn't do that if you didn't have those kind of buttons. You would just have the D-pad.
Yeah.
Which is why I never really played racing games on the NES at all. Not that there were that many.
No, I don't recall there being a lot.
Road Blasters are what I remember, but that was, you never really had to turn in that game per se. You were on a rail. You were sitting on a rail basically, and you just went through the course. That's now I lost my train of thought. I finally hit the wall.
You hit the wall. You got distracted by the shoulder buttons and racing and all that fun stuff. I mean, this is a topic I think that we would definitely have to come back and continue on, because there's a lot more to this.
Right.
A lot more I'd love to get on and talk about, but also, I mean, we only are allowed so much time.
Right.
And I do have to say, I think all in all, though, when it comes down to it, I know back in the early to mid 90s, I have a Sega and it's better than you, pleb, because you have an SNES and I have the more mature games and all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, most of it, if you really go back and look, a lot of it, let me rephrase this, a lot of it came out on both platforms, even though at the time I didn't know that was a thing.
Right.
Outside of maybe Mortal Kombat, I knew that was on both systems, but a lot of the other stuff came out on both. And I think they were both, for their times, really good systems that had some pretty funny.
We were all victims
and amazing
of
ads.
Corporate marketing. And God bless it. I love it. And I would go through it all over again.
I blame the early Saturday morning cartoons because that's always where I'd see it.
Well, yeah, okay. You had real quick. We could do the fight there. It's basically on even grounds because both the first Sonic cartoon and the Mario Brothers Super Show had some really weird episodes. If not all of them were weird episodes, and then they turn around where they had the Super Mario Brothers 3 and the Super Mario World cartoon, which were better quality, and then you had Sonic. What's the one? It was an actual.
Was it like the more darker?
It was a darker one.
Sonic?
Yeah, it was an actual story.
About. Yeah,
it was an actual story. And Sega Sonic Saturday Mornings or something like that. I think it was called.
I don't remember.
I honestly don't ever remember watching it. I don't know if it's because I never caught it or either because I was watching maybe Ninja Turtles at the time and they had the same time frame on different channels, or I don't even remember if maybe I just refused to watch it because it's Sega. I honestly don't know, but I know I never got to watch it.
I remember watching it. Like I do remember that.
Yeah, I do remember the first one, which was absolutely batshit crazy.
Yeah.
Even for a 7, 8, 9-year-old, it was just nuts. And of course, turn around and I end up watching Animaniacs and Freakazoid, but that's neither here nor there. So there's a certain level, there's a quality level of crazy, and there's just what the hell you doing?
Yep.
So,
but I think for where it stands right now, we have at the moment still two very good systems in their own right that had some pretty badass titles that came out on each of them. I know for me, a lot of it at this point is just like a lot of it's nostalgia. It's just remembering the arguments back and forth, and getting a chance to try like
I have Star Fox.
Star Fox coming out, and then I remember arguing with a classmate like Star Fox is like the hardest game ever, man. You can't beat it. And
it's 3D.
And it's amazing looking. There's nothing like this out on the market.
Right.
And then their argument would be like,
no.
Yeah. And then like their rebuttal to it would be like something like, well, we have Sonic, and that's like
blast
super
processing.
Fast. We have the blast processor, even though I'm pretty sure the blast of processor wasn't really.
It was
a regular processor. Like it wasn't anything special. I think
Genesis was just capable of producing and managing more sprites on screen than Super Nintendo. But again, that's on the base system. Obviously, with additional chips on the cartridge, depending on the game, that could change. But whenever I hear blast processing and the Nintendo's slow, I just pull out F-Zero. And that just, kind of shuts them up.
Yeah.
And if you notice, a lot of the videos of the advertising for Sega, when they talk about how slow Nintendo is, they never show F-Zero. They show Mario World. Okay.
Of course.
They don't show, even Mario Kart, they'll show Mario Kart, but not F-Zero. All right. And we're talking launch title here.
Yeah.
And they never could really top F-Zero. Really?
Yeah, that was a fun game back in the day. Yeah,
still a fun game.
Oh, of course,
still a fun game. But yeah, in any case, maybe we should, I don't know if Eric was more of a Sega guy. We're gonna have to talk to him next time when he gets back.
This is definitely a topic I wanna come back to and talk some more about, and actually maybe get into because now. Just keep in mind, this is like the beginning of the argument there. We haven't even gone into the N64 GameCube arguments and that whole spectrum, if you will. Though granted, not GameCube. GameCube and Dreamcast, I guess, would be the thing. That could be like the argument.
By that time,
those were still going on.
But by that time, the PS2
was out,
and that was the behemoth. And Sega's downfall, I think, was really not Nintendo's GameCube, but that Microsoft got into the market and forced a crowd, and Sega just got left behind in the dust real fast when the Xbox came out.
Well, this is definitely a topic I think we should touch back on.
And it'd be interesting because by that time, for me, I was the PC gamer, so I I looked at this from from a distance at this point. My experience with Nintendo 64 games and GameCube games are just emulations, really, at this point. So yeah. And for Dreamcast, I play a lot of Quake 3, so that's on Dreamcast. Thumbs up. Right.
Well, this is definitely something I think we should turn around and I think we should bring this in for the next time around. But the way it's looking, I think that's all the time that we'll have for today.
Yeah.
So, thank you for everyone who's been listening.
Thank you.
Two of you. Thanks. Be sure to check back with us again as we continue this conversation on the next episode.
See you then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.